The greatest mistake most people make when dealing with a master manipulator is believing the battle begins when the manipulation becomes obvious. By that point, the game is already well underway. The manipulator has spent days, weeks, or even months studying your habits, your emotions, your insecurities, and your desires. They have watched how you react to praise, how you respond to criticism, what makes you angry, what makes you guilty, and what makes you desperate for approval. While you believed you were simply having conversations, they were collecting information. While you thought you were building trust, they were building leverage. This is why the first lesson in outsmarting a manipulator is not learning how to fight them, it is learning how to see them. Most manipulation is invisible because it hides behind ordinary human behavior. A manipulator rarely announces their intentions. They don't walk into a room declaring they want control. Instead, they disguise their motives as kindness, concern, friendship, romance, mentorship, or opportunity. They understand one timeless truth about human psychology: people rarely question what feels familiar. If they can make their influence appear natural, you will defend them even as they quietly control you. Think about the greatest strategists throughout history. None relied solely on force. They relied on perception. Whoever controlled perception often controlled reality. A master manipulator follows the same principle. They know that if they can influence how you interpret events, they never have to force your decisions. You will make the choices they wanted all along while believing they were entirely your own. This is why awareness becomes your greatest weapon. Notice how manipulators often create emotional urgency. They pressure you to decide immediately. They insist that you don't have enough time to think. They make you feel guilty for asking questions. They frame hesitation as weakness or disloyalty. Why? Because clear thinking requires space and manipulation depends on speed. When your emotions accelerate, your judgment slows. The disciplined mind refuses to be rushed. When someone consistently tries to force immediate reactions instead of thoughtful responses, pause. That pause is more powerful than any argument. Silence interrupts manipulation because it breaks the rhythm the manipulator carefully designed. They expect predictable reactions. They expect anger. They expect fear. They expect guilt. What they rarely expect is observation. Observation transforms everything. Instead of asking yourself whether someone is telling the truth, begin asking a different question. What outcome benefits this person? Suddenly, conversations reveal entirely new meanings. Words become less important than patterns. Promises become less important than consistency. Charm becomes less important than behavior over time. Manipulators often rely on contradiction because most people have short memories. One day they flatter you, the next day they criticize you, then they apologize just enough to regain your trust before repeating the cycle. This emotional inconsistency is not accidental. It creates confusion, and confused people become easier to influence. When your mind is busy trying to understand someone's unpredictable behavior, it has less energy to evaluate their intentions objectively. This is why keeping emotional distance is essential. Emotional distance does not mean becoming cold or uncaring. It means refusing to let temporary emotions become permanent decisions. Every significant choice deserves clarity, not emotional turbulence. One fascinating aspect of manipulation is that it often reveals itself through excessive emotional investment. A genuinely confident person has little need to control your opinions. They can disagree without becoming threatened. A manipulator, however, feels compelled to direct your thinking because control is their source of security. Watch carefully whenever someone becomes unusually invested in how you feel, what you believe, or whom you trust. Ask yourself whether they are guiding you or quietly positioning themselves at the center of your world. Human beings naturally seek certainty. Manipulators exploit this desire by presenting themselves as the only source of answers. They simplify complicated situations into absolute choices. They convince you that everyone else is against you, that only they understand you, and that leaving them would be a terrible mistake. This strategy slowly isolates you from independent perspectives. The antidote is intellectual independence. Never surrender your ability to question, read widely, listen carefully, compare actions with words. The more perspectives you expose yourself to, the harder it becomes for one person to dominate your thinking. An independent mind cannot be easily imprisoned. There is another subtle tactic manipulators frequently use. They mirror you. At first, this feels comforting. They seem to share your interests, your values, your dreams, even your sense of humor. You begin believing you've finally found someone who truly understands you, but often they are not revealing themselves, they are reflecting you back to yourself. They understand that familiarity creates trust faster than honesty. This is why patience becomes a form of intelligence. Time exposes what performance cannot sustain. Anyone can pretend for a few weeks. Very few people can maintain a carefully constructed mask over months or years. Character eventually replaces performance. Truth eventually defeats appearances. One of the strongest habits you can develop is separating observation from interpretation. Observe facts before assigning meaning. Did the person repeatedly break promises? Did they consistently shift blame? Did they create conflict between people? These are observable realities. Once you learn to trust evidence more than emotion, manipulation becomes dramatically easier to detect. Remember, your emotions are valuable, but they should never become your only source of information. Feelings are signals, not verdicts. A manipulator hopes you'll mistake emotional intensity for truth. A wise person recognizes that truth survives careful examination. Perhaps the greatest psychological shift you can make is understanding that not every invitation deserves acceptance, not every compliment deserves belief, and not every conflict deserves your participation. Your attention is one of your most valuable resources. Wherever your attention goes, your energy follows. Manipulators survive by capturing that attention. Strategic people decide where it belongs. When you begin seeing the invisible game instead of merely reacting to individual moves, everything changes. You stop becoming a target because you stop behaving predictably. You notice patterns before they become problems. You recognize intentions before they become consequences. Most importantly, you reclaim the one thing every manipulator wants to steal from you. Your ability to think independently. Seeing the game is only the beginning. Recognition without discipline changes very little. Many people eventually realize they are dealing with a manipulator, yet they still lose because they continue responding emotionally. Awareness opens your eyes, but emotional control keeps you free. A master manipulator does not need to overpower your intelligence. They only need to overpower your emotions. The moment they can provoke anger, guilt, fear, insecurity, or desperation, they gain access to your decision-making process. And once emotion replaces reason, you begin participating in a game you no longer control. This is why the greatest battlefield is never the conversation itself. It is your own mind. Manipulators understand something that philosophers and psychologists have repeated for centuries. Human beings are far more predictable when emotionally disturbed. A calm person asks questions. An emotional person reacts. A calm person observes patterns. An emotional person focuses only on the latest insult, compliment, or disappointment. This difference is everything. Imagine a chess player who becomes frustrated after losing a single piece. Their frustration clouds their judgment, causing them to overlook opportunities and make reckless moves. A manipulator wants you to become that player. They create emotional distractions because they know your attention is limited. If your mind is consumed by defending yourself, proving your worth, or correcting every accusation, you are no longer thinking strategically. This explains why manipulators often provoke unnecessary arguments. Notice how some people seem less interested in solving problems than creating emotional chaos. They twist your words, exaggerate your mistakes, question your intentions, and suddenly shift the topic whenever you begin making sense. The goal is not communication. The goal is destabilization. When your emotions become unstable, your judgment follows. The disciplined individual recognizes this pattern and refuses to participate. Instead of immediately defending themselves, they become curious. Instead of raising their voice, they lower it. Instead of chasing approval, they become comfortable with misunderstanding. This is not weakness. It is one of the highest forms of psychological strength. There is an old principle that remains timeless. Whoever controls themselves cannot easily be controlled by others. Think about how difficult it is to manipulate someone who refuses to panic. Pressure loses its power. Threats lose their urgency. Insults lose their sting. Even praise loses its ability to inflate the ego. Such a person becomes psychologically balanced, and balance is deeply frustrating to anyone who relies on emotional leverage. Many people misunderstand emotional control. They imagine it means suppressing feelings or pretending nothing affects them. That is neither healthy nor sustainable. Emotional mastery means acknowledging every feeling without allowing it to dictate your behavior. You can experience anger without acting recklessly. You can feel disappointment without becoming hopeless. You can recognize fear without surrendering to it. This distinction separates mature minds from reactive ones. Manipulators search for emotional buttons because they assume everyone has one that can be pushed. Perhaps yours is criticism. Perhaps it is rejection. Perhaps it is the need to be liked or the fear of disappointing others. Whatever the button may be, the manipulator presses it repeatedly until they discover which reaction gives them the greatest advantage. Your responsibility is not to eliminate emotion. Your responsibility is to understand yourself so thoroughly that your emotional triggers no longer surprise you. Self-awareness is stronger than self-defense. Ask yourself difficult questions. What kind of criticism immediately upsets me? Why do I feel compelled to explain myself to certain people? Why do I become anxious when someone withdraws attention? Why do I seek validation from those who have done nothing to earn my trust? These questions are uncomfortable, but they illuminate the hidden doors through which manipulation enters your life. One remarkable truth about psychological strength is that it often appears as patience. Society celebrates quick responses, immediate opinions, and constant availability. Yet wisdom moves differently. Wise people pause, they reflect, they resist the pressure to answer every message instantly, solve every misunderstanding immediately, or respond to every provocation. They understand that time is an ally of clarity. Silence, in particular, is a powerful discipline. Manipulators often fear silence because silence creates uncertainty. They cannot easily predict what you are thinking. They cannot guide a reaction that never arrives. Many people rush to fill quiet moments because silence feels uncomfortable. The manipulator expects this discomfort and waits for you to reveal information you never intended to share. Learn to become comfortable with silence. Allow pauses to exist. Let conversations breathe. Not every accusation deserves an answer. Not every opinion deserves correction. Sometimes the strongest statement you can make is refusing to provide the emotional reaction someone desperately wants from you. Another overlooked aspect of emotional discipline is consistency. Manipulators frequently test boundaries through small actions before attempting larger ones. They may disrespect your time, dismiss your opinions, ignore your limits, or subtly undermine your confidence. If you tolerate these smaller violations, they interpret your silence as permission rather than kindness. Calmness should never be confused with passivity. You can remain respectful while enforcing clear boundaries. You can decline unreasonable demands without becoming hostile. You can walk away from unhealthy conversations without seeking revenge. True confidence does not announce itself through aggression. It reveals itself through unwavering consistency. One of the greatest psychological advantages you can develop is becoming less dependent on external validation. Manipulators gain influence over people who constantly seek approval because approval becomes a bargaining tool. They offer it one moment and withdraw it the next, creating an emotional cycle that keeps others chasing acceptance. But the individual who derives confidence from personal values rather than public opinion becomes incredibly difficult to manipulate. They no longer need constant praise to feel worthy. They no longer fear temporary rejection. They understand that respect earned through integrity is infinitely more valuable than approval gained through compliance. Remember, emotional discipline is not built during peaceful moments. It is forged under pressure. Every difficult conversation becomes an opportunity to practice restraint. Every insult becomes an opportunity to strengthen composure. Every attempt to provoke you becomes a test of whether your mind belongs to you or to the person trying to control it. This is why calmness is not simply a personality trait. It is a strategic advantage. People often admire confidence, but what they are truly witnessing is emotional stability. The confident person is not fearless. They simply refuse to let fear become their leader. The composed person is not untouched by criticism. They simply refuse to surrender their peace to another person's intentions. As you cultivate this level of self-control, something remarkable begins to happen. Manipulators lose interest. Their strategies become ineffective because they depend on reactions that no longer exist. They search for emotional openings and find none. They attempt to provoke confusion and discover clarity instead. They expect impulsiveness but encounter patience. They expect insecurity but meet quiet confidence. And that is the moment the balance of power begins to shift. Once you learn to recognize manipulation and develop the discipline to remain emotionally steady, you reach the final stage of psychological mastery. At this point, the objective is no longer to defeat the manipulator through confrontation or retaliation. It is to make their strategies ineffective. The greatest victory is not proving that you are smarter. It is creating a situation where manipulation simply cannot take root, because you have changed the conditions that once made you vulnerable. Many people believe they must expose a manipulator publicly or outplay them in dramatic fashion. That instinct is understandable, but it often leads to unnecessary conflict. A skilled manipulator is usually experienced at turning confrontations to their advantage. They may deny, deflect, play the victim, or provoke others into questioning your credibility. If you walk into their preferred battlefield, you have already accepted their rules. Real strategy begins by refusing to play the game they designed. History repeatedly teaches us that the wisest strategists did not waste energy attacking an opponent's greatest strength. Instead, they quietly redirected the conflict until that strength became irrelevant. The same principle applies in psychology. A manipulator thrives where there is emotional chaos, endless explanations, and predictable reactions. Remove those conditions and their influence begins to collapse under its own weight. One of the most effective ways to do this is by becoming intentionally difficult to read. This does not mean becoming dishonest or secretive. It means understanding that not every thought needs to be spoken, not every plan needs to be announced, and not every emotion needs to be displayed. People who reveal everything about themselves unknowingly provide a map that others can exploit. There is tremendous strength in measured communication. Notice how manipulators often ask questions that seem harmless on the surface. They appear curious, supportive, or deeply interested in your life. But over time, they are collecting pieces of information, your ambitions, fears, disappointments, financial concerns, relationships, and insecurities. Individually, these details seem insignificant. Together, they form a psychological profile. Wisdom requires discernment. Share your trust gradually, not automatically. Let people earn access to your inner world through consistency rather than charm. The less unnecessary information you provide, the fewer tools exist to be used against you. At the same time, become a careful observer. Listen more than you speak. People naturally reveal themselves over time. They reveal their priorities through repeated actions, their values through difficult decisions, and their intentions through patterns that remain consistent. A manipulator often believes they are studying everyone else while remaining invisible themselves. Ironically, this confidence becomes their weakness. Those who underestimate observant people often expose themselves without realizing it. Patience is one of the most underestimated forms of intelligence. Manipulators frequently depend on impatience. They expect immediate trust, quick emotional reactions, rushed decisions, and impulsive commitments. They understand that time allows people to recognize inconsistencies. Therefore, they attempt to accelerate relationships, agreements, or emotional investments before questions begin to emerge. Your greatest response is simple: slow everything down. Before making an important commitment, pause. Before believing extraordinary promises, wait. Before responding to emotional pressure, give yourself distance. Time has a remarkable ability to separate performance from character. Masks become difficult to maintain. Contradictions become impossible to hide. What once appeared convincing begins to reveal its cracks. Another powerful principle is learning the art of strategic boundaries. Boundaries are often misunderstood as walls that isolate us from others. In reality, they are filters that protect what matters most. They communicate that your time, energy, and emotional well-being have value. A manipulator often interprets weak boundaries as invitations rather than limits. Every time unreasonable behavior is tolerated, the next violation becomes easier. This is why boundaries must be calm, consistent, and non-negotiable. You do not need anger to enforce them. You need clarity. Sometimes the most powerful sentence you can say is simply no, no lengthy explanation. No apology for protecting your peace, no attempt to convince someone determined to misunderstand you. Every unnecessary explanation gives a manipulator another opportunity to argue, twist your words, or introduce guilt into the conversation. Confidence rarely needs excessive justification. There is another shift that changes everything. Stop trying to win every interaction. Instead, focus on winning your peace of mind. Many manipulators succeed because they lure intelligent people into endless debates. They provoke arguments that have no resolution, forcing you to spend hours defending obvious truths. Meanwhile, they remain emotionally energized by the conflict itself. Once you recognize this pattern, your priorities change. Instead of asking, "How do I prove them wrong?" you begin asking, "Is this conversation worthy of my attention?" That single question saves enormous amounts of emotional energy. One of the greatest traps manipulators create is convincing you that every attack deserves a response. But silence can be more persuasive than argument. Walking away can be stronger than winning a debate. Protecting your mental clarity is often a greater achievement than protecting your pride. Remember that influence is not measured by how many people you defeat. It is measured by how little unnecessary conflict controls your life. As you continue developing psychological strength, something fascinating begins to happen. The people who once attempted to manipulate you begin searching elsewhere, not because they suddenly became ethical, but because manipulators prefer easy targets. They seek those who react impulsively, reveal everything, ignore boundaries, and desperately seek approval. You are no longer that person. You have learned to observe before acting. You have learned to master your emotions instead of being mastered by them. You have learned that confidence grows from self-respect rather than external validation. Most importantly, you have learned that true power does not come from controlling others. It comes from becoming impossible to control. This is the quiet transformation that changes every relationship in your life. Friends respect you more because your boundaries are clear. Colleagues trust your judgment because your decisions are thoughtful rather than impulsive. Even those who disagree with you recognize that your actions are guided by principle instead of emotion. In the end, the greatest trap a manipulator sets is the belief that power belongs to the person who controls others. But that is an illusion. Power has always belonged to the person who controls themselves. Once your mind is disciplined, your emotions are balanced, and your principles are stronger than outside pressure, every attempt at manipulation loses its foundation.